Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Pipeline 2026, Building Succession Plans that Drive Results. This is a hot topic, and we were really excited to prepare for this. We've got some really great information to share with you today. My name is Kim Littlefield. I'm a partner at Keystone Partners, which is now a member of the Career Minds family. Very exciting news. Our mission at Career Minds is to empower organizations and individuals to thrive at every stage of the workforce cycle. And we do this by combining integrated insights, talent solutions, and transition support, which is part of what we're going to talk about today. We help companies get stronger, develop stronger leaders, and move forward with clarity and purpose. And again, that ties in with the whole succession planning topic. So we're excited about this today, and we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A. Megan Mendino, who is our producer, is going to be monitoring that. And if we don't get to any of your questions, we will certainly follow up to the answers to those in an email after this. This session is being recorded, and we will be sending it out via email as well. So joining me today are my two dear colleagues, Mary Halpin, who is our Senior Career Management Consultant at Keystone Career Minds. Mary has an interesting background because she was a senior HR leader at several large financial services firms who were really front runners in succession planning and are still doing it. Mary would probably tell you it's not a one and done type of activity. And she also has another lens where she works with our senior leaders who are in transition from our client companies who are trying to fill those vacancies. They're trying to be the solution, okay? And then Gary Bettger is one of our senior consultants, executive coaches, and also a facilitator. He does facilitate many topics, but this topic especially is near and dear to his heart. He's worked across commercial, public, nonprofit, international sectors, and again, has worked with clients who've been what we call front runners in this particular area. So these are our experts today. Keep the questions coming. We thought we would take kind of a 30,000-foot level to kind of talk about what succession planning really is, to level set. First of all, I started at this firm, I hate to say, several decades ago, so it makes me sound old, but we started talking about succession planning back then. And I would say it's kind of like our workouts when January rolls around, or get fit plans. We say we're going to do it, but we don't always know how to do it, or we don't always have the resources or the time or the people to help us do it. So succession planning, we kind of feel falls in that bucket. Companies talk about it. They know they need to do it. Their boards tell them they need to do it. The senior leadership team discusses it, but are they executing on it? And that's what we're hoping you'll leave here with today, is how to execute on it. The benefits, Gary, I'm going to let you talk about those because there's some really major benefits, and then we're going to show you some stats.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Look, folks, the benefits of succession planning are real. I've been doing strategic planning for many, many years, and it's really interesting to me because succession planning has always been there. But the problem is it's largely been more of a backroom HR type of activity. It hasn't quite gotten the sort of the shine that it should, because it's really essential to the organization and the dynamics of an organization. So the benefits that we're always trying to preach about succession planning is take it out of the back office. It's not just for HR anymore. It's really for leadership as well. Second, it's not something that's one and done, right? A lot of times succession planning, something like this, people will say, all right, let's spend a week, let's spend a day, let's get leadership together, and then it's one and done. Quite frankly, it's something that you should put into the fabric of the organization. And when you do put it in the fabric of the organization, you start to see business results. Three, when you connect it to other aspects of what you're doing in your organization, pure play strategic planning, leadership development, coaching, all of these sorts of things, then you're really starting to see that it has an impact. And look, we're seeing in the industry, McDonald's, Microsoft, Procter and Gamble, all these different organizations are promoting succession planning and showing that there are actually business results that come out of not only periodically doing succession planning, but doing it in a repetitive way and putting it into the fabric of what leadership is doing every time. So we're looking forward to talking more and more about what we're seeing, what we suggest that you might want to do in your own organizations with succession planning. But the bottom line is it's real. It needs to be seen as something that all leadership does do and should do, and it does have demonstrable business results for your organization. So I'll pass it back.
Yes, and we had so many stats on this topic when we prepared last week. We actually had to whittle them down, but these are the ones that we wanted to highlight because we found them staggering. 50% of employers have ready now successors. That's half, and I would say it's probably less than half based on what we've seen with our clients. 75 million baby boomers are expected to retire in 2030, and at that same year, there'll be a 6 million person shortage for the jobs that need to be done. 10,000 baby boomers are retiring daily. And this one just blew my mind. To replace a senior leader, it costs 200 to 400% of their annual salary. So if you have a leader that just says, I'm done, I'm out of here, I won the lottery, this is what it's going to cost you. So this is why we want to talk about it. It's real. The other piece is organizations that have gaps, vacancies. It takes them longer to fill those vacancies. Mary, wouldn't you say that? You're doing the career transition work.
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk to CEOs across the all industries, all areas, the biggest concern they have is hiring the right people into the roles that they need filled. And the biggest concern our job seekers have is finding those roles. And the process just isn't set up right now to do a good match to solve those problems. When you put onto it, and one of the reasons, and I'll double down a little on what Gary was saying around people making it a back office, not making it a priority. There's so many other urgent priorities that come off. And when you have a gap, you actually have more work coming onto your plate every single day that needs to get done because someone's missing from your organization. And you shouldn't, but you can put off hiring, you can put off creating your succession plan. Um, because the urgent pain may be someplace else. And so it does really create a huge amount of pressure, not only for your company, but for your employees who are there, which can also create turnover, which only exacerbates this problem more and more. Um, and one of the things we're going to talk a lot about in this webinar today is keeping your people engaged, focused, trained, and ready to take on higher level roles to avoid all of this pain and anguish.
Mary, you were sharing with Gary and I that you had recently read a Harvard Business Review article on this very topic. I'd love for you to share a couple of those other staggering statistics.
Absolutely. So, Kim, yes, I read it this morning as I was prepping up for today. A Harvard Business Review came through, and I did share it out on LinkedIn too. So, if you're on our LinkedIn page, please take a look at it. But they're talking about the aging workforce, and the value that companies are now starting to find in what we would affectionately call more mature workers. But people over the age of 60 are projected to outnumber children under the age of 5 within the next year. And by 2025, which was last year, we expect 25% of workers in the US and the UK to be over the age of 55. So our workforce is aging. We know that to be a fact, and we've seen it in the statistics that Kim has sent. And in every country, they're seeing job vacancies outnumbering job applicants. And in the US, this has been happening since 2018, as largely a result of baby boomers retiring and millennials not being able to step in and keep up the pace. And what they are now finding is more mature workers are actually found to be more valuable than younger workers, that they're 3 times more likely to create and work for successful companies as a result of their patience, collaborative natures, and that they have lack of I need to prove myself, which you tend to find in younger workers. In addition, we're living longer, so we need more money. Who those of us who fall into the mature ranks, and therefore we want to keep working. And so gone are the 65 and retire days. And companies are starting to say there's value here. And so I think for all of us who are on this call, it's how do I keep my employees engaged, skilled, and then ready to produce in the face of all this?
I
Yes,
would,
and we're going to talk about that in a second. So I think you can see we've set the stage as to why this is important. Megan, if you could move to the next slide, Gary, I'd love for you to just drill down on, these tiles here on why it really does matter to companies and people.
yeah, and just to pick up on what Mary was saying, folks, the gotcha effect is in place, unfortunately. I think everybody instinctively knows many of the statistics that we were just showing you, but still, because there's so many things that you have to do as a leader in an organization, there hasn't been as much action in the past as we had hoped. But then all of a sudden, gotcha. Oh, the CEO of your organization announces I'm going to retire in 6 months, or oh, two of your SVPs are moving to another organization, and then like, ooh, now hair is on fire. Now we've got to move. So one of the themes that we want to get across to all of you through this hour is get ahead of that. We're not psychics. You can't predict the future with perfect success, but you can mitigate the risk of unexpected happenings by getting ahead with succession planning. So to this slide, a lot of times we are asked, well, what the heck is succession planning? People sort of know what it is, but don't know exactly what it is. So a definition that we would like to share with you, a structured process to ensure leadership continuity by identifying and I make a dramatic pause there, developing potential leaders. It's both identifying, but it's also what are you going to do about that if we now know that the CEO is going to retire in 2 years? Have we identified a few people that might be able to fill his or her position? Plus, are we doing something, giving them shadowing opportunities, mentoring opportunities, so on and so forth, to go into that role in 2 years? What is the key purpose? Well, we want to minimize business disruption. We certainly want to safeguard our knowledge and we want to prepare for the future. Sorry if you're not a sports fan, but the famous hockey player, we just had the hockey Olympics this past weekend. The famous hockey player Wayne Gretzky was asked one time, well, why did you score so many goals? And he said, well, I didn't skate to where the puck was at. I skated to where the puck was going. The same thing applies here, right? You need to, again, we're not psychic. We're not going to get it all right. We're going to make mistakes, but you and your collective wisdom as a leadership group can certainly predict 80% of what's going to happen. So some factoids that we like to share with folks like you: reduces leadership gaps from unexpected departures. It reduces loss of institutional knowledge. Think about your organization, the CEO or a senior leader's been there 20 years, 30 years, and then all of a sudden they leave and all of that information in their head, right? We've got to figure out a way to capture that mind share and that legacy culture that's so important to the success of any organization.
Gary, can we take that one? Because I hear that
Yeah.
from a lot of clients. It's like they know they need to capture the institutional knowledge, but sometimes I wonder if the why is understood. So give us an example of why it's so
Yeah,
important.
sure. How things are done, how lessons are learned, how risks are mitigated. So many of these tangential items, everybody knows what the basic activity is: go talk to a customer, produce something, sure. But what people don't know, unless they get into the mind share of people that have been there, is, oh, we faced that same risk 6 years ago with a different client. And the way that we dealt with it was, and I'm just making something up here, of course, we used the purple approach instead of the green approach. Well, but nobody else knows about the purple approach except the people that were there. So being able to bring those lessons learned, those risk mitigations, those cultural elements to the day-to-day basic stuff is just so important to the success of an organization. That's why we care so much about that one, Kim.
Mary, I'd love for you to double click on what Gary said, because as an HR leader, I'm sure you saw this, right? So can you give us some examples of when it was done right, maybe when it was done wrong?
Yeah, I think, there's that old story about the mammoth ship that stopped working in the Navy, and they called in an engineer, and he walked around and he banged it with his wrench, and turned to to the person and said, "Hey, you owe me $200,000." He's like, $200,000, like 180, 20,000 for walking around and 180 for knowing where to bang it, in order to fix it. So I think that's kind of what Gary's talking about. And I've heard from a lot of leaders, and I even started to hear it years ago as AI technology changes. Is it so important to know the past because the future is going to look different? And while I concur 100%, the future is going to look different. We all know that to be true. I always use the analogy: if we all wanted to drive from wherever we are today to California, for each one of us on this call, it's a different route because we're starting in a different place. And if you don't know where you're starting, you don't know how to direct yourself to get to where you want to go. So to jump onto Gary's example, if you don't know what the risks were, or you don't know how they've been mitigated in the past, you're not going to be effective in figuring out how to solve them in the future. Even if you would do it a different way than you did it in the past, you have to have that institutional knowledge.
Love it.
Thank you. So Gary, I know the business continuity and the resilience, there's that word again. I feel like we've been talking about that since COVID hit. It's
Mhm.
almost like it's overused.
Look, whether it's COVID, whether it's snowstorms in the Northeast today, I mean, there's stuff that happens to every organization, right? So again, how can we build continuity and resilience? Now, there's a lot of ways you can build resilience in an organization. There's many topics. But again, succession planning is one of those ways to build a resilience in your own organization. Look on the bottom too. I think this one gets discounted sometimes. It improves employee engagement and retention because, as we'll talk later in this hour about some approaches to succession planning, it's about transparently talking about and identifying, Joe and Janie might very well be ready to be CEO in a year or two if the CEO does retire, right? The fact that Joe and Janie are now transparently being talked about is, of course, going to engage and most likely retain them because they're valued. There's no promises. It doesn't mean that Joe or Janie exactly is going to get the CEO role. We know it's a little bit more difficult than that, but we have these conversations not only with senior level people, but even down throughout the mid and junior levels of the organization. It's not about being in the back room, sort of the proverbial smoke filled room where all of these conversations are going on secretly. No, it's about a transparent, healthy discussion about who's where in the pipeline. We want to help everybody be the very best that they can be and support the organization's needs. But then
Yes.
how can we help them get even further in the future? Kim, you had something there?
Let's take that one because I feel there's assumptions made, and Mary, chime in here. Assumptions made that Joe and Janie want the role,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's
right?
one of the biggest challenges that most companies face when doing a succession plan is they do it, as Gary was talking about earlier, in that back room in a closed door meeting, and they never bring Joe and Janie into the conversation. So we assume Joe and Janie will want what we want for them, and we never ask them, what do they want out of their career? And then your CEO, congratulate yourself. We did a great job. We have a wonderful succession plan. We got two ready now successors for when our CEO retires. And when you go to Joe and or Janie, whoever you choose, they say, yeah, no, I'm not interested in that role. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to retire too. So now I
It's fine.
don't have a successor and I don't have whatever Joe and Janie were doing. So I think, I've seen over the years in my work as an HR practitioner, leadership really reluctant to bring the employees into the conversation. And most commonly they've been reluctant because they feel like they're setting expectations that they may not meet, right? To Gary's point, both Joe and Janie are not going to be the CEO. Frankly, maybe neither are. There could be a dark horse candidate that comes in at the last minute. But I think what we've started to understand as leaders is if we're considering these people for senior level roles running big parts of our organization or our organization, and they're not mature enough to understand that aspect of it, then they're probably not the right person for your succession. So taking this out of the back room, not only creating your plan, but bringing the people who are part of your plan into it. The other thing when I was working as an HR professional, we did a high potential program with our named successors for a chief compliance role that was critical in the financial services industry. And we told them that why they were in this program. What we didn't see is people getting upset when they didn't get the role. They sat around a table with 6 of their peers. They knew there were other people in the game. But what we did see is a great deal of engagement in their own development to make sure that they were ready. We saw them driving the engagement. When we were late getting a program scheduled, when we were late getting information out to them, they were all over us. They took it really seriously because they understood the goal and they were bought into the program. And they all achieved a lot for themselves personally and professionally. Yeah, only one of the 6 became the chief compliance officer at the end of the program when he did retire. But the other 5 would tell you, we learned a ton and we gained a lot of knowledge and experience, and I'm going to use it in other capacities in my career. And they stayed. They didn't get upset.
Let me join in on Mary's comment too. We're also seeing, Kim, in a lot of organizations that are flat. There's not a real big, 7 steps between X and the CEO. And 2, where there might be a lot of similar roles. This is just sort of a made up example, but I think you'll all understand. Maybe an accounting firm, right? Where there's a lot of accountants. And so there's a relatively flat structure with this big pool of accountants and then maybe a couple levels up to the senior most level. And it's a non-differentiated role. An accountant, bless them, is an accountant, right? So an organization like that will say, well, why do we care? Because it's very flat. There's not a lot of movement, so on and so forth. No, we care there as well because you can still do succession planning in terms of identifying your movers and shakers, helping them to be the very best that they can be, developing them. So don't only think of succession planning as replacing the CEO. It goes deeper into the organ. Of course, we almost always start at the senior most levels, and that's vitally important, of course. But it goes down through the organization as well.
Can we talk about that a little bit more? So I love what you were saying, Gary, about the transparency, right? But it's also about having career conversations, to your point, Mary. And one of the things that comes up is we're making assumptions that Joe or Janie wants the next job. It kind of goes the other way, which is the employee sometimes thinks it's up and out or stay or you're out, right? There's no gray area. So I've seen leaders approach HR and say, well, I just assumed that because I didn't want to take the next step that I would need to retire at 65. Instead of, Mary, your role in HR being able to say, oh no, Janie, you could actually work part-time or you could consult or do contract work. So can we talk a little bit about that?
I think this concept of a lattice career has started to really take hold in the last, probably 5 to 10 years, where companies are really much more open because we know what the pyramid looks like, right? Everybody can't get to the top. And I worked for a privately held, very large financial services company here in Boston. And the family ran the company. So if you weren't a family member, you were only going to go so far in that company. But it didn't mean you were a valued, important member of the leadership team. And so it was helping try to create different opportunities, different ways to contribute that really engaged the workforce and helped drive our business forward. And so I think what we all know about, those of us in the HR world know about employee engagement, it is tying them to the mission, purpose, and values of the organization. If you understand how the work you do supports the overall mission of your organization, your engagement level will rise, right? It's not about more money always. It's not about more responsibility always. For some people, that's important, but not for everyone. But it's always about how am I moving forward this organization? And I think being able to explain that, and it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about being open and honest. I see you in this role. I see you as a contributing, and I see this is ultimately where you fit, and working with the employee to understand how to marry our two visions for your career together.
And it allows people to self-select.
Mhm.
We see all the time a person, I don't really want to manage people. I'm very happy as an SME.
Mhm.
Or my family and I are in a bit of a difficult, we got young children, or, we're just in a place right now where I can't go for the CEO position right now. And that's okay. People
Mhm.
need to self select what they're comfortable with at any given time. And we use tools like the 9 box tool, which is a term of art, that a template that we use in succession planning all the time, where we can figure out where those individuals are. And it's fine. They may be in a box in the middle of the 9 box rather than Joe and Janie looking to be CEO in 2 years. There's nothing wrong with that. We need more than a CEO to make an organization run effectively. So yes, we can look across, and we do look across the entire organization. So another theme we want you to take, friends, today is succession planning is not only about senior leadership.
And that brings us to the last tile, right, Gary, that it's a strong leadership pipeline throughout all levels. You touched on that.
Love it. Yeah, I love it. Leadership starts with a CEO or the head of an organization, but we take a very broad definition of leadership, and you need leaders, frontline managers, you need leaders of project teams, you need leaders of a lot of things. So again, starting at the top, we're typically not going to start a succession plan from the junior most students that just got out of school last year. But starting from the top, we're going to go through and look at leadership needs throughout the entire organization across those different parameters, of course.
Gary, let's take that one. HR is usually the ambassador of this type of initiative.
Yeah.
Why is it so important that you have the support of the most senior leaders?
Yeah. Just saw that with an organization some weeks ago when we had them together, the senior most executive team. And look, this is an executive team. They're a smart bunch. They're an executive team for a reason, right? Because they deserve to be there. But like most executive teams, they only knew succession planning at a very distant level. So to be able to work that with them for a full day, get them to talk the same vocabulary, understand, and we'll talk about this here in a few minutes, criticality, vulnerability, some of these topics that come up in succession planning a lot, was really vital because now when they get together once a quarter, a couple times a year to talk about succession planning, they have similar vocabulary, they have similar experience. We don't need senior leadership to all to be succession planning experts, but we do need senior leadership and frontline supervisors to go from a 3 out of 10 knowledge of what succession planning is to maybe a 6 out of 10. So you can have vital, good conversations with your peers when it's necessary to do it.
Mary, from your experience in your senior HR roles, why is it so important to have the most senior leaders on board?
Well, because they're driving completion of the program, right? It's a project. It's work that they're driving through their organization. And I think what we've been talking about and what we see so commonly in my role is senior leaders are pencil whipping a form as opposed to really understanding. It's not about filling out an org chart with different colors, people underneath each role, or even a 9 box. It's about the conversation And I think what HR practitioners, in my experience, sometimes struggle with is getting them to understand it as a business driver, right? It's a business goal. It's not, when we take it as an HR program, an HR project, we sometimes look at it as a nice to have or a good thing to do or building the morale of the organization. But it's really as critical as having your compliance infrastructure put together is having your business plan. It's part of your contingency plan. It's part of your, your backup plan as to how you're going to run this company. And business leaders understand, like, how are we going to back up computer programs if we have a cyber incident? How are we going to back up this if this happens? How are we going to back up the human capital in your organization, which about 80% of US businesses say is their number one differentiator, is their human capital, the people they have to do their work? How are we backing them up if we have an issue or a concern? When I worked at this very large privately held financial services industry in Boston, we had restrictions on who could fly with who because if the quote unquote plane went down, we couldn't wipe out the whole leadership. But we had no strategy that said who's a backup for who. So your backup could be sitting in the seat next to you, right? It was just the numbers of people that could be on each flight. So bringing it into all of those kind of conversations as part of how you run your business is something that we have to really strive for.
It connects, Kim, to something else too. We often talk about what does a leader do, right? A leader envisions a future, right? A leader has relationships with customers and other stakeholders. A leader has to mitigate risks. Well, a leader also has to develop people, right? Leadership development. A leader has to manage finances, make sure the budget is there to support whatever the organization's trying to do. Well, a leader also has to identify and prepare talent. It's the connection. Again, none of you on this call, regardless of what your role is, we don't need you to be a strategic planning expert and a budget expert and an HR expert and an LD expert. It's impossible, right? But we need you all to have good quality 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 knowledge of things that are not even your exact specialty, because the conversations that you need to have cut across all of those things. And so if you're the greatest HR expert or greatest strategic planning expert in the world, 10 out of 10, but with a smile on my face, nothing about these other topics, it's going to be difficult because these topics require some knowledge of all of these things and come together and discuss. That's why we want to get everybody up to the proverbial 6 out of 10.
So, Gary, I know you're going to share your overall 6-step approach in a few minutes because we really want people to leave with a roadmap. But what are some of the other pitfalls that you've both seen? We talked about a couple of them already, that, doing this under the cloak of darkness in the smoke-filled room, not being transparent. But what are some of the other mistakes or pitfalls? Mary, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pitfalls or mistakes I see happen, and to Gary's point, I think HR leaders should be the subject matter experts in this process, right? But leaders have to be participants. They have to be party to it. They have to put their emotional and intellectual energy into it. And I think often we make it too complex and too cumbersome, and it just caves upon its weight. I'll share briefly. I had a senior leader who I worked with, and he used to say, the problem with HR, you always ask me if I love my mother. And I'm always going to say, yes, I love my mother. What you really need to know from me is, what am I willing to do for her? Am I moving her into my house? Am I building her condo? Or am I buying her a place in Boca? We live in Massachusetts, far away, but safe, right? And so what kind of effort are your leaders willing to put into this? Because they're not going to put the level of effort into it that you will, as an HR practitioner, to drive it. And if you don't make it sustainable, if you don't make it something that they can commit to and that they can do, then you're going to get them, they're going to be not be able to keep up with it. And so I think to the analogy, we often as HR practitioners say, do you believe in succession planning? Do you think it's a critical component of your, your overall strategy? And they're always going to say yes. What senior leader is going to say no to that? But what are they willing to do? How much energy can they expend? They have a lot on their plate, particularly if you're dealing with in the senior levels of the organization. And this is outside of their comfort zone. So, how do you create a program or a process that allows them to do what they have to do successfully without overwhelming them with work?
I love that
100%.
analogy. And Gary, I'd love for you to comment on it, how it dies under its own weight. We see that, so much time and energy by so many HR team members is spent on this, and then it just dies on the vine. So what do they
Dies
do?
dies on the vine first, Mary. I bet a lot of people in the world, this United States, would love to be living in Boca these
Oh,
days.
yeah, today I
We
would.
all moved to Boca until April. Uh, yeah, it's a balancing act, and Mary is right on it. We don't want to overwhelm because, look, you're asking leaders to come to a monthly, a quarterly session on succession planning. They, of course, have their day jobs, right? So if you make it so overwhelming, and they're going to just, not because they're being recalcitrant, it's just because I can't. I've got too many other, I've got to talk to a customer, I've got to go, whatever. So you can't make it overwhelming. And the way that you don't make it overwhelming is get some sponsors from that leadership group, maybe a few, to enable a small group, including HR and leadership development and so on, to build a structure, a process, usable templates, layman and laywomen oriented templates, not things that are so arcane that right, you got to make them understandable even to a leader, right? So a little background work, building some templates, building some governance, building some structure, so when they get together for that 2-hour meeting once a month, once a quarter, it's seamless. It makes sense. They can do something. You've created an environment and a structure where they can have a real vital conversation. All right, let's get back to Joe and Janie. Where are they at? What do we need to do? Are they still on the path? Those sorts of things, rather than worrying about being overwhelmed with processes that they don't understand.
So let's get into the process. Megan, if you could go to the next slide. Gary, as we had mentioned earlier, does a lot of consulting with our clients around succession planning. And he's come up with this simple 6-step process. We wanted you to leave with, what do you do now? Whether you're a small 20, 30 person organization, or you're, thousands of employees all over the world, you've got to start somewhere. Most of the larger organizations have done something. Wouldn't you agree, both of you?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call I don't have the budget. I don't have the buy-in yet. So this is where we want to kind of start. Gary, I'm going to let you take that from here.
Yeah, let's talk about this. I don't know if this is exactly proprietary, and I and Keystone don't, suggest a monopoly of brilliance. This is just bringing together best practice from a lot of different sources. But these steps, friends, seem to work. And the first thing that I will point out is, of these 6 steps, we're not even going to talk about our friends Joe and Janie until step 5, if you can believe that. It's not about talking about individuals too quickly. There's some preparatory work. Let's start with the first, mapping strategic initiatives. I do a lot of pure play strategic planning, mission, vision, goals, objectives, strategies. And it's not that we're replicating strategic planning, but we need to understand what are the key drivers, the key outcomes, where is the environment of the organization going? Because, of course, as we think about leaders of the future, we certainly want to make sure that we're taking into account of drivers and outcomes. Certainly, a great example that's affecting a lot of industries is artificial intelligence, of course, right? What are we doing to get, if not ahead, at least even with all of the movement in technology, right? But there are many other drivers in many different organizations. Two, when we understand the strategic initiatives and the strategic trends, identify positions. What positions do we need to be focused on with our succession planning? And I want to really take the dramatic pause here and make sure you understand two key definitions. A critical position is one that is very central to mission achievement. The CEO, of course, but there are going to be others throughout the organization that are just, you know, all positions are important, right? But there are some that you all know that are just really critical to our achievement of our mission. That's a critical position. A vulnerable position is one. It could be critical or it doesn't have to be critical, but it's one that we don't necessarily have somebody in mind or in place to take over when that person has left. So it's vulnerable not because of its mission centricity, although, as I said, they usually are mission centric as well. It's just we don't, is Joe going to take over? Is Janie going to take over? We don't know what's going on when somebody leaves. So you really need to think through those different types of positions.
And Gary,
Yes.
would you agree that it's also depends on the stage of growth that the organization's at as to which roles are critical or which roles are vulnerable?
Of course. I think we can, without too much concern, say that the senior leader, the CEO, the SVP is typically going to be critical, but it would be foolish for us as a consulting group, as a coaching group, to come in and say, we know exactly in every organization, no, 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 no. We need to sit down and talk with you, understand the strategic initiatives, understand the culture, understand the competition, and think through, okay, in this organization, X, Y, and Z, which may be a little bit different from another organization, are the critical ones. Mary, do you agree with that? Or
Yeah. And I was going to also jump in, Gary, to say not only do I 100% agree with you, but this is the first place where we start to over index and over manage and create this large succession plan because everybody wants their positions to be critical. Everybody wants to feel like I'm a critical element to my organization.
right?
And so helping senior leaders and leaders in the organization understand the difference between critical and important, right? We're not saying if you're not a critical member of a team, you're not important to the organization and we don't care about you. You don't have a career, you're never going to get a bonus. But a lot of leaders, even at the senior levels, will come to the table and really strongly advocate and I'll go back to the same senior leader I was just talking about a minute ago. He had a lot of good leadership qualities. But he used to, when we would have these conversations, he would actually make us push back from the table, the conference room table, and push our chairs up against the wall until we could come to the table and advocate for what was in the best interest of the organization, not ourselves, not our team. And it's really difficult to do that because we don't want I don't want to be the one person at the table that has no critical position in my organization, right? But if you let everybody kind of use their emotion and create all these critical positions, you're going to get a succession plan with 20 roles where you really want to gear it to the most critical and really be able to help leadership articulate the difference between critical and important.
Love it. Yeah, and
Great.
we almost should probably put important as the third type of
Mhm.
position in our little box there. Great, great stuff, Mary.
Yeah.
Developing criteria. Now that we've mapped strategic initiatives, we have the criticals and the vulnerables. Now, what does that position need? Now,
Mhm.
probably 80% of it is what it needs now. But then again, because of AI, because of technology advances, because of internationalization, all these different things, we need to think about what those quote unquote other 20% are in the future around profiles of the position, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and success factors, right? What will help Wayne Gretzky not skate to the puck, but skate to where the puck is going, right? We always need to be ahead of the game. Number four, identifying talent pathways. And again, I will emphasize, friends, we have not talked about Joe and Janie yet. We're talking about initiatives, positions, now pathways before we even get to individuals. Here, we identify talent pathways to become CEO, become SVP, become whatever. What are perhaps some of the traditional pathways, the future pathways? Can we do a gap analysis? Maybe there is some type of expertise we're trying to get from the outside that we're not giving on the inside, but really try to create what is the traditional or most useful talent pathway to get persons to that critical position.
Mary,
Find
can you jump in from the HR side of the fence here on step 4? How would you do that?
So I think just going through and really coming up with skills that the person needs to have, and then identifying where they can gain them, right? So one of the most successful ways we've done succession planning in the past is say somebody needs to learn that, would is lacking this avenue or this in order to be a leader in this part of the organization, someone would have to know this, and then move them into that area, create a pathway for them, purposely change their job as an ability to let them learn whatever it is we need to learn. But I think all too often, and I think their HR people in the call you probably relate to this, we'd say, well, they have to learn international trading. Like they don't have the international arm and they can't run the whole trading organization without it. So we'll put them as ready later. Well, how are we getting them ready, right? I think that's what Gary's talking about. How do we identify what are the things that somebody would need to have? And then how do we find the right people, which is in the next step, and then create that training plan so that which can mean job movement, right? Reassigning them to another area of the organization to gain that skill.
Love it, love it. If we're looking to the CEO role, and Joe and Janie have only worked internally and have not had outward facing, stakeholder facing roles, well, we're probably going to need to get both of them into some sort of stakeholder facing role, customer facing role before they're ready to be CEO. It just comes to reason, right?
Mhm.
Then
Thank
we,
you.
yeah, absolutely, great points, Mary. We turn to number 5. We identify that prospective talent pool, and this is where we use, and we don't have time in this hour, but just look up on the web a 9-box tool. This is where we use tools like the 9-box to identify. All right, Joe, Janie, others, where are they fitting against readiness and capabilities and so on? And again, it's not a performance assessment. It's not to diminish anybody that's not in the upper right corner of the 9-box, but it's just a way for us to understand where people are at and then build into number 6 around how do we actually um, develop them. And sorry, we have a typo on number 6. It's not developing criteria. Again, what we meant to say here was this is actually developing the individual instead of developing the criteria. Our apologies. That's where we're actually doing the coaching, where we're doing the mentoring, where we're sending people off to leadership academies. This is where we're helping. If Joe and Janie are close but not quite there, this is where we actually develop them into the place where a year from now they can be CEO or so on. Uh,
Gary, we have a question from the audience. Other than the 9-box, is there an alternative to identify talent?
there are look, there are many different alternatives. You can do a 9-box together as one group. You can ask individual departments, individual parts of the organization, individual managers to select who they think are individuals that might be ready for different positions. You can you can do internal surveys, right? You can do things where people can nominate others that they're seeing that are doing, particularly good performance. It really depends on what is your purpose, right? Do you want to do a 9-box and a leadership group all together? Or if the organization's not quite there yet, do you want to allow managers throughout the organization to identify for their own parts of the organization and then consolidate? Or if you're just starting and people are a little tentative, don't know exactly what they're doing, just do more of an anonymous survey and gather information and bring it together like that. So sure, there's certainly other opportunities besides 9-box.
Mary?
And I would also say it's not about a 9 box. It's not about creating a succession plan document. It's about the conversations you're having both at the leadership table and with your team. And so, however you want to keep that, it's for posterity. It's not for, it's not the end result of these processes. And I think, if we go back to my leader who said, what are you willing to do for me? If they're not willing to do a 9 box, you don't need to fill out a 9 box in order to have a great succession plan. What you need is exactly what Gary's talking about, but the knowledge of who's ready, who's not ready, but we want to get ready. Like, it's just a matter of collecting data, and it shouldn't become the focus of these programs. It's the conversation that you're having with your leadership team and the conversations your leadership team is having with their team members to figure out how to make all of this work. And so don't focus on 9 box or succession plan or filling out this form. Focus on having those robust conversations. And these tools are only to capture it so you don't forget what you talked about the last time you got together.
Yeah,
Mary.
good point. There's hearts flying.
Yeah, you had
I just made
you had a few fans for that comment there, Mary.
But I think
Really
that's
quickly on this,
too often. We create a 9 box and we say, check, we have a succession plan, and we don't.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not about
Good point.
checking boxes. It's about having a vital strategic conversation, right? Really quickly, I know we're short for time and we do want to answer a few questions, but consistent success factors, why do we care about any of this? Internal talent development yields better outcomes. Now, look, folks, of course, you know as well as I do, sometimes you're going to have to procure talent from outside. It's just reality. But if you had an equally talented, equally educated, equally, SME type of person from the inside and the outside, we're going to want to go with that internal person because of the legacy culture and the know-how and all that sort of stuff. So why not take care of your people internally and then, of course, procure talent on the outside as you need it? We have multiple candidates ready now and ready later for key positions. We're not one and done. We're not constrained to, if that person leaves, all we have is Joe or Janie. No, we have Joe and Janie, and we can work together to get either or both of them ready. It aligns succession with future organizational strategy. Again, my Wayne Gretzky idea, we're going somewhere. We have to meet the needs of the future, not just the needs of our current state. Maintain clarity, communication, and governance. Look, folks, maybe somebody doesn't like that they're not up in the upper right quadrant of a 9 box, but at least they can't say that it's not transparent. It wasn't done out in the open with criteria and those sorts of things. And then finally, we preserve culture while adapting for the future. As a strategic planner, but also as a change management guy, I have heard and I agree with the idea culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? We don't want to lose that culture as we're planning for the future. And one way to do that is to build your internal pipeline of skills and talent while not losing the culture that they bring and the knowledge and the know-how that they bring along with their abilities. So, Kimmel, Senator,
Thanks, Gary.
you're there.
Really helpful. We're going to be sending this deck via email, so you'll have this flow and certainly answer any other questions you have. From Liz in the audience, both Mary and Gary, and Mary, I'll go to you first. If someone's ready for a long time, and if someone has been ready for a long time and they're interested in the job, would you address the tension between succession planning and flight risk?
So, I think you most likely have a blocker situation where you have someone who's in the role that's not moving themselves. Like, I'm good, I'm going to stay here, and they call those blockers, and you're creating that tension below you. So I think as an organization, you have to do an assessment as to where you want to put your eggs, right? If you will, right? So sometimes you're going to go to the person in role who's blocking others and say, look, this is a opportunity we need to give so and so in order to get them ready for such and such, or help them by creating their kind of succession and where they want to go. But I think a lot of times companies are reluctant to just say, hey, and this is one thing we did, and I'm going to say the name at Fidelity very successfully, is if I wanted Kim's job and Kim wasn't sure what she wanted to do, they might just flip us and say, well, Kim, give this a shot and we're going to put Mary into your role and see how you guys do doing different things. So I think keeping, and particularly if you have critical roles, making sure that people in them know that this isn't yours until you're ready to give it up. This is a company role that we need to cycle people through in order to create them and grow them. But you know, those kind of where you have a blocker or someone that's staying in role and someone who's an up and coming that you need to get into that role in order to for the betterment of the company long term. Those are the hard decisions you have to make, but you probably have to move that blocker out into another opportunity.
Yeah,
So
agree.
speaking of blockers, sometimes there's an employee that we know is of retirement age. You know, let's just say it's the traditional 62, 65. How can companies tackle that? The person may be saying out loud that they're planning to retire, but they're not giving a timeline, which we've seen quite a lot. Or they may not be saying anything and there's just an assumption because of their age. How might HR handle that and senior leadership? Mary, we'll start with you.
So I think that's a touchy situation, right? Because you cannot, you know, unless you have a performance issue with that person, in which case you're addressing a performance issue, not their age and their potential to retire. You want to be very careful about how you handle that. But I think, you know, having conversations with employees with the new term is stay interviews, right? We all know what exit interviews are. These are stay interviews. These are for people who are staying in the organization and really understanding why, what they want, you know, where they want to see themselves going. But you also can't be shy about moving people around and creating that culture in your organization where you could go to someone who's a blocker and say, you know, we need to have you experience this organization from a different place. And so we're going to move you over here, right? And move them into a new opportunity. And then not to say it's punitive, but maybe it's unblocking them as well as unblocking your succession plan. Because often, you know, we're creatures of habit as humans, right? We get comfortable with our role and I'll just keep doing it, right? And sometimes we can jumpstart that with moving them around a little.
Gary,
Yeah.
we've got a question, and I'm just watching the time here, so I'm going to have you answer this one. We've got a very long tenured leader, 30 plus years. We're also undergoing a ton of change as an industry, and in order to be successful now and in the future, we need people who embrace and lead change and also have ideas that are innovative. Sometimes long tenured people get tunnel vision and are not exposed to different ways of doing things, different thinking, etc., because they've only been in our organization. What are some key factors that should be part of succession planning that can counteract this so we don't have this hire from the outside to have this outside view? Gary, how would you take that one?
Wow, great multi-part question there. It really wraps up these last few questions. The person that has been in that role for 30 years, the potential blocker that Mary's talking about, the potential flight risk, right? Maybe only been there a few years and you don't know. All of those should and could benefit from being part of succession planning. Because look, it's healthy for an organization to have a conversation. Should we move some of those people around at the top level? What can we do for potential flight risks if we really feel that they have critical skills that we need for the future? So how do you do that? It starts from the top. The CEO and the senior leadership have to be willing to model the behavior. They have to be willing to be part of the succession planning discussions rather than, oh, that's for the rest of you in the organization. If they model that they're willing to go through those conversations, maybe move into different positions, and then model to the entire organization that this is healthy for all of us to do, it's good. And specifically to the flight risk, you're going to lose some people just because they want to move across the country. That's not in your control, right? So what we want to do is focus on the skills necessary and what we need to do to make everybody as happy, reasonably speaking, and as successful in their positions. It starts with having a conversation, and it starts at the top.
Wonderful. Well, we're at time, folks. Thank you for joining us. As you can see, the themes are transparency, having open conversations, and starting now. We will follow up with a recording of this webinar today, as well as answers to questions we didn't get to. But if you haven't started, start now, and please call Keystone Partners and Career Minds if you need support. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.